everybody. It's Friday, March 21st, 2025. If it's a Friday, it must be that was the week. My weekly roundup of news with Keith Teare from That Was the Week. This is the week, according to Keith at least, that Europe goes mad and AI marches on. And the madness in Europe, at least according to Keith this week, is about Europe's attempt to control and regulate American AI, particularly Apple, but also Google. Keith, happy Friday. I know you got up early today. You're not a morning person, unlike myself. This week, there's no news. I mean, Europe goes mad and AI marches on. Every week we talk about AI marching on. That's about as inevitable as you can get. And the madness in Europe, at least in your mind, for some people, it's a kind of sanity. That's also a weekly feature. So is there anything particularly unusual about this week, both in terms of AI marching on and Europe going mad?
No, I think you're right, Andrew. I have to bow my head and agree with you because these are old themes that seem to be reoccurring. Europe going mad has just reached a new extreme. I mean, just reading the European Commission declaration or whatever it is, it's almost as if, Apple are sitting there.
You actually read it, the European Commission, and we got it on the screen. Commission provides guidance under Digital Markets Act to facilitate development of innovative products on Apple platforms. I think I could read one sentence of that, and after that, I'd fall asleep.
I use the word audacity. The European Commission is facilitating the development of innovative products on Apple's platforms. I mean, you already know, the minute you read that out loud and think about it for a second, this is delusional.
Here's I'm going to say it's a pushback, Keith, because I'm not quite as hardcore as you on regulation, but I'm broadly in agreement. But the other headline this week, I mean, this is a tech show, so maybe you shouldn't have included, but the other big headline this week is that Germany is set for €1 trillion, which is basically $1 trillion defense and infrastructure splurge. With what's happening in Ukraine and MAGA and Trump and all the rest of it, what's increasingly clear is that Europe is going its own way. So it seems to me as if whilst we can mock, you and I in Silicon Valley on the west coast of the US can mock what the Europeans are doing, this does reflect a real direction that Europe is developing, for better or worse, and I know in your mind it's very much for worse, a different model.
Well, they're not really, Andrew. They're being forced to consider one. Due to the fact that they are somewhat irrelevant in the world, have leaned heavily on the US as a supporter through the NATO alliance, and that they now are super insecure that isn't going to continue. So they're making all kinds of announcements. Clearly, spending $1 trillion on rearming Germany is not.
Well, it's a beginning. I mean, you can't just write them off. I mean, we put their numbers together. It's the world's, I don't know, first, second, or third largest economy. It's still a continent of significant political, economic, cultural, and eventually military strength. You can't just write them off because you don't like their policy on Apple.
No, I just don't think you're capturing the direction of movement when you say that. You're being emotional because you like Europe, like I do as well, by the way.
No, I'm not being emotional. I'm just being realistic. I acknowledge that they're not going to have the innovation of the US or probably the military might of China or even Russia, but they are going their own way. I'm being anything but emotional. I think you're the one being emotional in the sense of being upset with, in a way, disappointed. It's like being disappointed with, I don't know, an alcoholic who keeps on going back to the bottle.
Eva Pasco, who was one of the kind of most well-known founder of Siberia, Eva, I'd say that about you, says Germany is the biggest arms exporter after the US, not a small beer. And of course that's true. Germany is it's a highly challenged economy, but it's a big economy. It's been shrinking. Its car industry, especially Mercedes.
Right. I mean, we know that this is not a show on the car industry.
Yeah, but what are we trying to capture here, Andrew?
Well, what I was thinking on this in terms of the non-news is that there will be, in 5 or 10 years, it seems to me, a European tech model. Either one where
why do you think that? Where's that coming from?
It's coming from all the headlines. Either, and let me give you two alternatives. Either
what even is a European tech model? I mean, there isn't an American tech model.
Well, there is an American tech market. There is a model.
That's because innovators are unconstrained mostly by stupid regulations and driven by gain to do their best work.
Well, but, there's an American model in contrast, say, to the Chinese model, which is much more state-controlled, state-centric, but also highly innovative and successful. Let me just lay out two options in Europe. On the one hand, in 5 or 10 years, Europe will be so highly that there still won't be a European tech, much of a tech industry, European search engines or AI companies, but it will be so sort of regulated, thick in red tape, as it probably already is, but even more compounded. On the other hand, there may be a state subsidized European tech industry. That's not inconceivable. Just as Trump, for better or worse, is forcing Europe to rearm and look and defend itself, so ultimately, won't the same happen with tech?
I don't see how it possibly could. I mean, just look at the new cars sold in Europe annually are made up mainly of Chinese cars from XPeng, from BYD, or Teslas. Even in Germany, which is the world center of manufacturing and good cars. So it seems inconceivable to me. What you've actually got is an unelected European Commission. It's appointed. The European Parliament is elected, but it has no power. All the power is in the Commission. It's appointed. It's a kind of a fiefdom, if you will. They have the temerity to think they can be the product management team for Apple, which is only going to lead to one thing, which is Apple doesn't want to do business in Europe, along with many others.
Right. So you're not necessarily, I mean, you're not happy about this. To me, I'm neither happy. I don't really care one way or the other. But so, as you say, they will interfere more and more with Apple. They'll come out with these absurdly bureaucratic regulations about what Apple can and can't do with their various iOSs and other products. And the same will be true of Google. Eventually, Apple will say, this is just not worth it for us. We're going to focus on other markets. We're just not wasting our time with you anymore. At that point, what happens to the tech industry or the tech market in Europe? Don't you have local companies, which are highly regulated, probably from your point of view, very annoying, very inefficient, can't compete in a free market with the US or even China, but will nonetheless exist. The other option, of course, as you're kind of hinting with the car market, is that Europe becomes colonized by the Chinese.
Well, a couple of things are going to happen. Ava said another thing, which is, the EU can turn the tap off for Europe, for American digital products. And indeed, that is true. They can do that. And they are doing that, by the way. But the consequence of that is quite profound. Almost all the good AI in the world is coming out of America and China. There is Mistral in France, which is increasingly looking like it's going to become an American company as well, due to the incentives to be here.
The French don't exactly have a stellar record when it comes to any kind of innovation, especially in tech.
So roll the clock forward on turning the tap off. It basically means European citizens don't get to experience the most recent innovations at the same rate that Chinese and American citizens do. And that's going to put European citizens in a second lane. It's a little, now, if there was an innovation culture like, for example, in Japan after World War II or Germany after World War II, where European protectionism was part of a strategy to build domestic industries. There's some rationality in that, but that doesn't exist. There's no industrial plan in the UK or France or Italy or Germany or Spain. There is a defensive militarization happening due to fear of Russia, which is not a good signal, I would say, for a prosperous future. So pretty much everything's going in the wrong direction due to the lack of faith in innovation and value growth through innovation, and the fear of American innovation leading to all kinds of protectionism. It just seems bizarre to me.
Well, it seems it's not just bizarre to you when it comes to, I mean, Europe is much more progressive politically, culturally, and socially than the United States or China. And you have an interesting piece this week on from The Guardian, which I think has had quite an impact on from Jia Chen, who describes themselves, I think it's a woman, as a recent STEM graduate. Here's why the right is winning us over. And what Chen talks about is the need for the progressive movement to organize technical talent. Is that the challenge in Europe, Keith, perhaps, to start rethinking their relationship with technology? Is that how the Danes or the Germans or the Dutch or the French will begin to rebuild their own economies to be able to compete with the US and China?
Yeah, well, Jay points to the fact that the right's message is more attractive to a STEM graduate than the left's. The left has become dominated by the idea that tech is a problem. The right is dominated by the idea, and this is quite new, by the way, that tech is an asset. And she just makes the simple point that as a young scientist graduating from university, the right's message aligns with her view that her life can be interesting and exciting. Now, in Europe, there is great science in Europe, fantastic science, probably as good, if not better, than US science, especially in Eastern Europe. But it is buried inside academia. There's no link between science and innovation through doing things. That famous quote, philosophers have interpreted the world, the point, however, is to change it. So the science is there, the talent is there, but the bottoms up company creating culture where entrepreneurs coming out of universities can work on projects that can, if they work out, impact the whole world, and as a side effect, make them rich. That culture doesn't exist. And that's even true in Russia, by the way. It used to be true in China. China was heavily academic, but has now become more...
Right. So if the Chinese can change and reinvent themselves, why can't the Europeans? There's an interesting piece in the New York Times.
They have to want to, Andrew.
Well, I'm not sure we can generalize about all 500 million Europeans about what they want to do. But New York Times has an interesting piece feature on Steve Davis, Musk's top lieutenant who oversees Doge. Do you think that guys like Steve Davis are a model for the Jia Chens of the world? Are the Doge people inspiring young people? There was a very interesting interview on the Ezra Klein show this week with a Democratic pollster about how successful the Trump people are with young people, especially young men. So clearly something's dramatically changing in terms of how young people are thinking about politics in the US and maybe more broadly, as Jia Chen notes.
Yeah, so putting those two together, Jia Chen really is a progressive wishing that the traditional left had a narrative about innovation and technology.
Well, then they wouldn't be the traditional left; they would be the untraditional left.
Yeah, exactly. So Steve Davis really is a doer. it's a little bit like we talked about Sam Altman hiring the marketing guy. I've forgotten his name now. A couple of weeks ago. So Musk has his doers, and Musk himself is a thinker that moves from thinking to wanting to do things pretty quickly. And so, yeah,
sometimes too quickly, some people might think, but anyway,
but it is inspiring, Andrew. I mean, Elon last night ran the quarterly all hands meeting for Tesla with a bunch of Tesla employees in a standing up in an auditorium, and it went on for about an hour and 20 minutes with Q&A. And you could see that the people who work for Tesla want to be inspired and believe in something good coming out of their work. And Jay Chen's the same. Steve Davis is the guy that acts on many of the ideas that Musk has. And so it's super important because everyone needs that. I can tell you in my career, I have been useless when it comes to management with a capital M.
Yeah, and I can speak directly on that one.
Exactly. But I'm pretty decent at the idea and execution stuff and the narrative and the story and making it happen. So I always
make it happen. So we are getting somewhere, Keith. We started off with Europe going mad. Now you're beginning, I think, to acknowledge that Europe can change. History doesn't just repeat itself, although sometimes it seems to. You have a link from an article from the 90s about comparing the original .com gold rush with today. Is there much difference? Has history changed? You and I were both around in the 90s. We were both part of you were in London. I was in San Francisco. We were both part of the original .com gold rush. Has anything changed much?
Well, the biggest change is that the center of world has moved to China when it comes to innovation. Ava points out in the chat.
Who is this Ava?
Ava,
maybe we should have her on the show.
Ava, I hope you're going to smile when I say this, but if Ava was on the show, you and I wouldn't be saying anything.
Is she one of your old ex-communist, libertarian, neo-fascist types?
She is not any of the above. Ava is very, very democratic, I would say. She's Polish. Her dad was a minister in the Polish government prior to the...
Oh, my God. Well, anyway, we'll get Ava on the show another time, but coming back to my question.
Which I've now forgotten because you distracted me. Oh yes, history changed. Look. The biggest shift is the rise of Asia. That's going to be the story for the next 30 years. America is a little bit like Europe in that the chances of Trump reinvigorating America's industrial base via tariffs are almost zero, and so America is also in decline. Europe and America only differ in the role for entrepreneurs in America, and the lack of regulation allows things to happen.
Well, those are pretty big deals. I mean, America is very different, much more. We don't want to turn this into just a geopolitical blah blah, but America is very different from Europe.
It is very different, except I'd say it's different by about 100 years. If you go back 100 years in Europe, which would take us to the early 1920s, the UK was already only the third most.
Okay, but coming back to my question, when it comes to this gold rush, Keith, has anything much changed from the 90s?
Yeah, it's gotten bigger. Firstly, it's gotten bigger. In the 90s, your distribution for software was people with IBM PCs or Macintoshes, and there weren't that many of them. Today, it's billions of people with smartphones. So it's gotten bigger. It's gotten more impressive. The ability to, modern AI, the things it can do, blow you away. And in the 90s, the nearest equivalent to that was being able to do a video call to someone on the other side of the world in black and white with text, not voice. Using a See You, See Me in Siberia Cafe. And so there's a massive change. The guy who wrote that, by the way, Stephen Bobrick, was a tenant of Eva Pasco and myself in Siberia.
This is Ava again. This mysterious Ava.
You've got to meet Ava next time in London, Andrew. Then you'll know.
Well, I have to admit that it doesn't seem as if, going back to the 90s, things have really changed. My interview of the week, I know this is rather self-centered, is myself. I was interviewed by a young journalist, Andrew Kekia, on my own show on the current state of American journalism. And it seems as if on that front, nothing much has changed. I mean, we've had this slow, inevitable decline of American journalism. All this promise of non-profit journalism is never realized. So again, while we do these weekly shows, in the long term, some stuff's just inevitable, like the rise of AI. I mean, you feature an interview with Sam Altman on Stratechery with Ben Thompson. He talks about the inevitability of AI, and perhaps he's right.
It's interesting how you pronounce the name of the publication. Steve Gilmore has trouble with it as well, but it's Stratechery.
Stratechery rather than
Stratechery. This is a fairly unguarded interview by Altman because
nothing with Altman's ever unguarded. He's a master manipulator, for better or worse.
Well, that's your point of view. He may well be. I think being a manipulator is an important skill.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly hasn't done him any harm.
Well, he in this interview he exposes his failures early in his career that led him to Y Combinator, which was as a result of failures, not success. And he's from a fairly modest background on the East Coast of America. But the interview is really all about what's coming next, and a little bit about GPT-5, a little bit about agents, a little bit about AGI, and it's good just because it gives you a bit more of a subtle insight into where things are. There's nothing dramatic in the interview, but there's a summing up of the current state of play. It's quite good.
You quote him in your editorial, and I think this is a good quote. My favorite this is Altman talking. My favorite historical analogy, I'm guessing, is the transistor for what AGI is going to be like. It's going to be a lot of it. It's going to diffuse into everything. It's going to be cheap. It's an emerging property of physics, and it on its own will not be a differentiator. I mean, maybe beyond even the transistor, it's just electricity.
Yeah, anything that has the tendency to penetrate everything, just like water does when it's released, has that characteristic. And AGI is definitely like that, in that you can implement it sitting at your desk at home in an app and have it running without needing to talk to OpenAI. So it literally can get everywhere.
And to remind everyone, AGI for our non-tech audience is artificial general intelligence, which suggests a level of intelligence at least as quote unquote intelligent as you and I, Keith, have. Maybe you. I'm less intelligent than you. Or Ava, of course. I think Ava is already super AGI, isn't she? Even though I've never met her. She's probably a bot for all we know.
I think she would aspire to be a bot. That would be a good outcome.
Well, we'll have to get her on the show. So everything seems to be inevitable. The decline of Europe, the shift in Europe to a big bureaucratic state. America's the inevitable, what you call the marching on of AI. But there is concrete news. A couple of interesting pieces caught my mind. One, again, self-serving, is a podcast, and this is from The Information. A podcaster develops AI to search his own episodes. I wouldn't mind that. I've got thousands of episodes. What podcaster and how are they using it?
I actually don't know his name, but he's building a kind of a web front end on top of his podcast. He's called Chris Williamson, and his podcast is called Modern Wisdom. And he's using retrieval augmented generation, which means that He's giving an LLM access to his content, indexing it, and then the LLM can answer questions about his content. It's a fairly standard thing now. Pretty much.
So we could do it. I could do it.
Well, he's hiring people to do it, which is the interesting thing. So he's still really not current, because if he was, he could do it himself using tools like Cursor, but he's hiring people and paying them.
In other words, you're suggesting he should pay you and you could do it for him.
I haven't got enough time.
Maybe you know who could do it, Keith? Ava. Might have to ask her.
By the way, if you ever meet her, she's going to punish you badly for continuing to mention.
I hope she punishes me. I like to be punished. So there is other news. Again, some people are making money. One investor from a $6 million bet on Wiz has turned it into a massive 200x return, as long as, of course, Google's acquisition of the Wiz is not held up by the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., the ones that are left. What do you make of the Wiz deal? Is it a wizardly, or is it just boring?
I think it's a little bit boring. It's about the importance of cloud security.
Cloud, I know from my wife, cloud is a big deal at Google.
Yeah, and you know, Google has made big bets in the past. This is a big bet. In the 32
what is it, a $30 billion bet? And it was last year it was a $20 billion bet, or it's gone up $10 billion.
Yeah, in cash as well, by the way. This is a cash payout. So it's a huge deal, and it puts Google closer to you know, an infrastructure player like Microsoft is with Azure, which they want to be. Google's job for the next 10 years is replacing search revenue. Because everyone assumes it's going to decline eventually to very little.
Yeah, I mean, even my AI engine, Claude, Anthropic, came out with a search application this week. So you're right on that. Another inevitability, like AI marching on. We will see with Wiz whether it actually goes through, but certainly someone's profiting from it. Meanwhile, the other piece, the final piece of news, not a big deal, but I was intrigued by it. I think I may have sent it over to you in the first place, or I certainly saw it, is Sequoia, one of the major VCs, are shuttering their DC office. What's going on now? I would have thought that all the VCs would be opening offices in lobbying offices in DC, particularly given how friendly now the Trump regime seems to be to moneyed interests of one kind or another.
I don't know what the thinking is in Roelof Botha's mind in doing that, but
in other words, you think he's crazy?
No, I actually think it's the right thing to do. I think you need lobbyists when the politicians are a problem for you. When the politicians are not a problem for you, you just get on with normal business, and you don't need to lobby. So I think it probably reflects victory. It's declaring victory.
Declaring victory, shuttering up, because you know you can just call Trump. You don't need to pay expensive lobbyists. Startup of the week is Mercor, that according to Brendan Foodie, whoever that is, has scaled from $1 million to $100 million in an annual run rate in 11 months. Mercor, according to them at least, matches you with elite opportunities. What is Mercor, and is this for real?
Yeah, Mercor is basically an AI platform. And by the way, disclosure, SignalRank has not announced, but is an investor in Mercor. Mercor is an AI platform for matching you with jobs that fit your skill set. And so it works for the applicant, and hence the elite opportunities. And you know, the Valley has been through 3 years of layoffs, so there's a lot of talent available. And that talent needs to be matched with the available jobs, which in AI at least are growing.
So what is it, an AI recruitment platform?
Yes. Not just for AI, it's a broad...
No, I mean, it uses AI.
It uses AI, exactly.
Yeah. So if you're unemployed, Ava, maybe use Mercor, it will connect you.
Now, the thing is, as we know, Andrew, there is a deep point here, which is AI is not it's probabilistic, not deterministic. That is to say, making a match between a person and a job is a deterministic skill, and LLMs are probabilistic. So it's going to be plus or minus good at doing this. That said, it's obviously good enough to have attracted $100 million run rate in a year. So let's assume it's
so 100 million. I'm always confused with this term run rate. What does that mean? $100 million. That's revenue.
If you divide that number by 12, that's the current monthly revenue.
So why don't they just call it revenue rather than run rate?
Run rate is the rate at which you are growing annualized revenue.
Run rate. If AI marches on, what's AI's run rate, Keith?
Oh, it's in the double-digit billions by now.
Trillions, I would think. Finally, post of the week is Sky associated with Skyreal AI, the first apparently text-to-film AI agent. What's the big? Is this for real, or is this just more AI froth?
So I played with it. I said to it, a Premier League footballer hasn't scored for 6 months, scores a hat trick in a game, and it created this, 30-second video of somebody wheeling away having scored their third goal that was quite realistic. So I'd say it is.
I mean, where's the Premier League or the context for that? It just shows someone scoring a goal. I mean, you don't need to be a smart AI to be able to do that.
No, it made a video from nothing, an actual video with people and physics and movement and realism from just a single line of text. So that what this is saying is that this software is capable of doing entire movie scripts and rendering entire movies with drama. And in the past, everything's been able to do a 30-second clip, but this one can do soup to nuts.
Well, speaking of soup to nuts, finally, if I had another interview of the week, I'm going to slip it in. It's with Dan Brooks, who wrote a really interesting piece on for the New York Times on how generative AI complements the MAGA style. And he referred to the Gaza 2025 AI-generated video that made a lot of news a couple of weeks ago. What he says is that this is more than just technology. This is an aesthetic, a style. And it actually goes together with the MAGA world. Do you think there's any truth to that? That, we go on and on about these new platforms like Skyreal's AI. Maybe they're for real, maybe they're not. But more importantly, there is an aesthetical element to this. It's not just about technology. There's a way of thinking about this technology that lends itself to our particular moment.
Don't know if I'm clever enough to pass that quickly and have an opinion about it, but
you need to read it. It's a very good piece in the Times from Dan about how generative AI complements the MAGA style. I think he's onto something.
I do think that MAGA is a word that describes a very broad and very different set of people. And in the technology part of MAGA that's embraced Trump, there is a kind of free-thinking, almost liberal attitude to change that
you're flirting with it, Keith. You're flirting with your friend Elon. You've sometimes got closer to putting your cards on the table. Are you still not in their camp?
No, I'm in the camp of Elon strongly. Although I think he's a blunderbuss when it comes to Doge. If I was advising him, I think I could help him cut a lot of costs without all of the negative publicity. So he's a bit of a blunderbuss, but broadly, I think Elon's great. What's bad to say about him, really? If you watched him last night, he's like a kid in that he really just instinctively responds to questions honestly about what he thinks, despite the fact that it might damage him. just to give you an example of that, last night one of the questions was, why is he working so hard? And he said out loud, well, of course, I could be on the beach full of bikinis. And then he paused and he smiled and looked up and he said, yeah, why aren't I doing that?
Yeah, it's because you won't find any. I mean, he could be, I mean, on the Gaza beach, maybe, but I don't think many bikinis would actually want to be with him. I think that's maybe one of his problems, but we will never know on that one. So, Keith, that was the week for March the 21st, 2025. Europe goes mad. AI marches on. No real news, although maybe we made a little bit of news by trying to think beyond the headlines of this week and imagine a world where Europe had its own tech companies, or certainly a policy that really profoundly distinguished itself both from the United States and China. This will be a theme that I'm sure we will investigate over the next few weeks.
Sounds like a fairy story that Disney should make.
Well, maybe it can make it in AI with Skyreels AI. Maybe suggest that.
Exactly.
It's more likely than scoring 3 goals if you haven't scored for 6 months. So, Keith, keep well, and I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Bye, Ava, as well.